More and more people are talking about intermittent fasting, but should you try it? And is it really healthy? That's what we're going to talk about today. So intermittent fasting is a huge topic right now, and I've gotten comments from a few different people asking me to talk about this in a video. So that was kind of the inspiration for this, and I'm really excited to discuss it with you because I know it's something that a lot of you are wondering about. Also, if you happen to be new here, this channel is all about healthy eating and nutrition, and I'm a dietitian. So if you're interested in that sort of stuff, then make sure that you subscribe. Now, before we get into, what I think about intermittent fasting, I did want to review real quickly what exactly I'm talking about, because I know not everyone is 100% familiar with what intermittent fasting is. So there are several different types of fasting that get lumped under the intermittent fasting umbrella, but there seem to be three that are the most popular and the ones that people talk about most often. So the first one is alternate day fasting, and all that is not eating anything on some days and then eating normally on other days. So you're going back and forth between not eating and then eating. Then the second type that's really popular is a style where you eat normally most of the time, but then there are some days where you severely reduce your calories. So you're not eating nothing, but your calories are very, very low, maybe like a quarter of what they would be typically. And then the third style of intermittent fasting, which seems to be the most popular out of all of these, is a style where you have 16 hours of no eating and then an 8-hour eating window. So you're eating every day, but you're just restricting the time that you're eating within a certain frame and then not eating for a longer period of time. And with this 16 hours fasting, 8 hours eating, you'll also see some people kind of shift that a little bit one way or the other. So maybe a little more time not eating or a little more time eating, but 16 and 8 seems to be the most common. And the proponents of intermittent fasting say that it will help you lose weight and it will make you feel better. And intermittent fasting is really popular in the bodybuilding and fitness communities. Now, in general, I myself am not a fan of intermittent fasting, and there are a few different reasons for that. So to start off, if you look at any information about intermittent fasting, there's a theme that kind of runs through it all. It's this idea that pops up again and again, and it is that there is this big myth out there that we need to be eating every few hours, and it's just something that's promoted by the mainstream. Now, aside from the tone running through that anything that is mainstream is automatically bad, I also want to point out that this whole eating every few hours, eating every 2 hours or something like that, lots of small meals, I'm pretty sure is something that was heavily promoted by the bodybuilding community. I think that came from them. So I just find it interesting that something that they used to promote really heavily as the secret or the key to whatever is now what they're saying is totally bad, and now you need to do this other thing that's different from that. Now that the eating all the time has become more popular, I just find that interesting. So I wanted to point that out. But I do generally agree with the sentiment that we don't need to be eating all the time. I mean, obviously we don't need 24 hours a day constant supply of food because our body is able to use energy from the meals that we eat, but it's also able to use stored energy that we have. So that can be from glycogen, which is stored carbohydrate, or the fat stores that we have on our body. And honestly, it's pretty normal to go a period of time without food. I mean, I had dinner at 7 p.m. last night, and then I had breakfast at 8 a.m. And if you're someone who isn't really hungry for breakfast in the morning, then you might, have your breakfast a little bit later. So then you're actually getting pretty close to that 16-hour window with the 16-8 style of fasting. But that sort of thing isn't fasting in terms of I'm going to set up these guidelines of I'm going to eat this much or I'm going to eat during this time frame or whatever. That's just listening to your body's hunger and fullness cues. Something else I don't love about intermittent fasting is the focus on weight loss. So much of the information out there is about how if you do this, you will lose weight, you'll lose fat, you'll get abs, whatever. And really, when it comes down to it, weight and where your weight is and your fat stores and all that kind of stuff, it's not about when you eat, it's about how much you eat. And it's also about your genetics because we are all shaped differently. So with intermittent fasting, if you do happen to lose weight, it's gonna be because you're eating less food, not because you're eating at certain times and not eating at other times. And on top of that, I don't think we should be focusing on weight loss anyways. Weight and health are not the same thing. And when you make weight your goal and you focus on that, then it puts you in a place where you can justify and you will do any behavior, even if it's incredibly unhealthy, just because it results in weight loss. And to push this point even further, I saw one doctor who's a big proponent of fasting talking about how if you just look at celebrities, a lot of those celebrities are fasting. That's what they do. They just don't eat for periods of time, and that's kind of their secret. And look at them. They look amazing. So that means it's good for us, it's healthy for us, and we should all be doing it. And there are a lot of issues with that statement for me. The first is this idea that because you think someone looks attractive, that means that they are healthy or what they are doing is healthy, because beauty and what's attractive is not something that's just kind of inherent. It changes, and there are different beauty standards depending on the culture. And also, if you follow a culture over time, those beauty standards change. So I don't think that's a good guideline to be going by. Plus, we're talking about people who are in a genetic minority. I mean, they just happen to have the certain traits that make them attractive, according to whatever the current cultural standard is. And then on top of that, celebrities have makeup artists and hair people and stylists and the most expensive, beautiful clothing, all of this kind of stuff. So to just say, you look at them and you think they're pretty, that means they're healthy and whatever they're doing is healthy. That's just not how that works. And honestly, for me, anytime I see a focus on weight with any sort of plan or program, that's a big red flag for me. Another thing I have a problem with is the talk around hunger and cravings that comes up in a lot of this intermittent fasting stuff. So I've seen people say things like, once you start eating, you can't stop. So if you can delay that start time and push that off a little bit, then that's going to help you not overeat. I've also seen people say that once you start eating, you can't stop thinking about food. So again, if you can delay the start time, then that's going to help with that. I've seen people talk about how when you're in that period of not eating, you're going to feel amazing and you're going to feel this bliss. Then I've also seen people, sometimes those same people who were talking about all the bliss that they were feeling, talk about how do you deal with hunger when you're fasting and not feeling great and having low energy. And their answer most of the time is more coffee, because you get the caffeine and it pushes your appetite down and all this kind of stuff. And then I've also seen people talk about how you think you're hungry but you're really not, and that's the real issue, is you don't know what hunger even is. And to that last one I say, maybe. I mean, yes, I can agree that sometimes people confuse physical hunger with other things. So sometimes people use food to deal with an emotional thing, or sometimes people are just out of touch with their hunger and fullness cues, so they're so used to using diets and external things to tell them what to eat and when to eat and how to eat that they're unable to really tap into their body, and they have to really strengthen that and practice that and get back in touch with that again. So that's true, but a lot of this you're not hungry stuff is really, no, these people are hungry, but it's this idea that you need to convince yourself that you're actually not hungry. And I think all of this can really be lumped together as side effects of dieting and diet mentality. It all really fits together with the restrict binge cycle that we see so often with just dieting in general. And all that is this idea that you are restricting your amount of food or the types of food, or sometimes both depending on what diet you're on, and you're restricting. And during that process, your body is pushing all the buttons and saying, we need more food, we're not getting enough, and it just keeps pushing and pushing, and you're trying to resist and resist, and it keeps pushing and pushing and pushing until eventually it forces you to break out of the diet and to just go eat something. And then what happens is, you swing the pendulum to this binge place, then you feel bad, you feel guilty, you broke the diet, you're a terrible person, whatever, and then you go back to the restricting, and you just go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And a lot of people in the intermittent fasting community add another layer of dieting on top of this. So some people say, it doesn't really matter what you eat, it's more about the timing, but a lot of people say, no, in addition to having these time restrictions on your food, you also need to be counting and weighing and measuring. You got to count your calories or your macros or whatever diet plan they're promoting in conjunction with the intermittent fasting. And again, it's just another way to use external rules and guidelines to guide your food rather than listening to your body and paying attention to your hunger and fullness cues. Another problem I have is that a lot of the tips in these intermittent fasting videos, especially the ones focused on dealing with hunger during your fast, they just sound like an eating disorder manual. I mean, these are the same types of tips and advice that you would find on an eating disorder website or forum, you know, a place where people are coming together to give each other advice on how to not eat. So I think that's something we really have to recognize. And if someone has a history of an eating disorder or is currently dealing with an eating disorder, I think something like this could definitely drive them deeper into their disorder, and it could also trigger an eating disorder for someone who is susceptible. Now, obviously not everyone who diets or does intermittent fasting has a diagnosed eating disorder, but we do have to recognize that dieting in general is a form of disordered eating, and that it can lead to an unhealthy relationship with food, and it can lead to us focusing on food too much. And I actually just did another video where I talked about, you know, when our concern for healthy eating goes too far and when we focus on food too much. So I'll link that video for you if you're interested. Another thing with intermittent fasting is that it could limit your access to nutrients. Now, this doesn't apply to every type of fasting. If you're doing the type where you are just compressing your eating into a smaller window of time, but you're still eating the same amount, then no, you're still getting the same amount of food. But if you are just cutting out days of eating, then yeah, you're not getting that food, so you're not getting the nutrients that come with them. And our body can't make a lot of the stuff that we need. That's why we need to eat. We get those things through food. So if you're not eating, then you're not going to be getting those nutrients, and you could be at risk for not getting enough. Another thing I want to point out is that just because something doesn't kill you instantly doesn't mean that it's somehow health promoting. A lot of times when you watch these intermittent fasting videos, people will say, you know, some people say that not eating could be bad, but look, I'm not dead and I feel great, and check out these abs, and then they lift up their shirt if they were even wearing a shirt in the video to begin with. We also have to remember that if someone is intermittent fasting, they probably live in a wealthy country and they themselves are not food insecure. And that matters because this is how we get into that restrict binge cycle. Our body has natural systems in place to make sure that we get enough to eat, and it's going to push us to find food and to eat that food so we can survive. But if you are not in a survival situation, if you have this abundance of food everywhere, then artificially restricting your food and then letting your body go and eat, that is going to create a situation where you can chronically overeat potentially, and also a situation where you can develop an unhealthy relationship with food. Again, these things are there to help us survive when food is not available, but when food is available, we don't need to test them or somehow rely on them and think that that's a healthy thing to do. Another idea I see floating around in a lot of the intermittent fasting talk is that fasting is incorporated into a lot of religious practices, and so that means that it's a healthy thing to do. And this is just one of those things that doesn't make any sense. Just because something is part of someone's religion doesn't mean that it's good or bad or healthy or not healthy. There really isn't evidence for anything other than the fact that fasting is part of that religion, and that's really all there is to it. If fasting is part of your religion, practice your religion. I mean, it is true that a lot of religions do incorporate some form of fasting, but that doesn't mean that it's something that everyone needs to be doing. It's not evidence that it's a healthy thing to do. And I think sometimes it can actually get a little offensive when you're taking someone's spiritual practice and then recommending it so people can get abs and look super hot. Another thing a lot of people talk about with intermittent fasting that I just can't get down with is that there is all of this evidence and research that intermittent fasting is the thing to do. There's all of this science. The science says it's true. Not really. I mean, we do have some research on this stuff. A lot of it is just focused on calorie restriction in general, not even specifically on these different like patterns of fasting. A lot of it's in animals, you know, so we've got some mice or some rats that have tried it. There are some human studies, but there aren't a ton of them. And one that just came out recently was looking at weight loss specifically with just like kind of regular dieting, calorie restriction overall versus intermittent fasting patterns of dieting, and they found that intermittent fasting wasn't any better than regular dieting for weight loss. And I don't think weight loss is even the point or the thing we should be talking about if we're trying to help people be healthier. So the point is that this isn't something where we just have these mounds and mounds of research piling up and it's just everywhere. There's some stuff we would need more, and just the way that people talk about it, like there's research everywhere supporting this, that just really isn't accurate. Another thing I want to point out is a lot of the people who are in the bodybuilding or exercise communities will say that, you know, if you want to look like this, if you want to have the abs, if you want to be ripped, you need to do intermittent fasting. That's a secret, that's what I do, that's how I look like this, that sort of thing. But that isn't true either. The reason those people look like that, it's a combination of things. It's a combination of their genetics. It's a combination of their exercise regimens, which are focused on appearance and building certain muscles and not building other muscles, all that sort of stuff. And then it's their diet. I mean, they are counting calories, counting macros. They are micromanaging their food, which I don't think is a healthy thing to do. So it's not the intermittent fasting that's the key for them. It's all that other stuff. And it's the same as the bodybuilding people 10 or 20 years ago who would have said that eating every 2 hours was their secret to looking like that. It's just the way those people look, and it's also all the other stuff that they're doing. I mean, another example are some of these celebrities who will say, you know, I got really ripped for this movie, and the secret was intermittent fasting, but 10 years ago when they got ripped for that other movie, they weren't intermittent fasting and they looked the same way. So you just have to remember that there's other things going on here, and some of these people are just going to be more likely to have that sort of appearance, and then they're also doing other things that are helping them to look the way that they do. It's really all about paying attention to your hunger and fullness cues, and if that means you eat dinner, you go to sleep, you're not hungry for breakfast, you end up eating a little bit later, and that just so happens to line up with what intermittent fasting recommends, then, you know, that's okay. You're paying attention to what your body is saying. But if you are hungry, don't try to convince yourself that you're not hungry and put off eating because of some external guidelines. Someone says you're not supposed to be eating right now. You need to be listening to your body and what it is asking for, and do that work to get back in touch with those hunger and fullness cues that we are born with, but that so often get broken down because of dieting and the diet mentality that's so pervasive in our culture. And let me know in the comments, what do you think about intermittent fasting? Have you ever tried it? Any experience is welcome. And let me know if you think I'm 100% wrong. I'm totally cool with that as long as 1, you actually watch the video, and 2, you aren't a jerk about it. And if you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you happen to be new here and you want more healthy eating tips and nutrition info and my thoughts on topics like this one, then make sure that you subscribe, because eating healthy and living a healthy lifestyle really doesn't have to be complicated, and I want to show you how to do it. Thanks for watching. I hope you're having a great day, and I'll talk to you next time.